The first round of the 2024 NFL Draft has officially concluded, so today let's rank every single pick of the 2024 NFL Draft. So in this tier list, we have 6 different categories, starting from A and ending with the team did not have a pick. Obviously, the Browns and Texans did not have a pick. Buffalo did not draft, but I'm still going to give them a grade because they maneuvered around the first round, and I think it's still worthy of talking about it. We're going to be doing this in order of each team, and if a team has 2 picks, then we're just going to group those 2 picks together to give them an overall grade for their first round of the draft. So with that being said, let's hop into it. At number 1, we had the Chicago Bears taking Caleb Williams, and then at number 9, they decided to take Rome Odunze. I don't think it gets much better than that. Like, I really wanted them to take a defensive player with their 9th overall pick, preferably like a Dallas Turner or a Latu, a Jared Verse, but Rome Odunze and Caleb Williams are going to be the cornerstones of that offense for the next hopefully 10 to 15 plus years if things go great for them. It's an A draft for them. I mean, they had a fantastic offseason and they are looking really freaking good as we look towards them in the next couple years. Washington at number 2 took Jayden Daniels. I'm not a massive Jayden Daniels fan. I think he's a good quarterback. He was my quarterback 3, so with that being said, I'm not going to make this an A. I'm going to move it up to a B. You're going to get yourself a versatile, unique prospect who people compare to Lamar and RG3, but really isn't very similar to those guys to the level that you might think. With that being said, I'm still going to move him up to a B because they did need a quarterback, and honestly, that is a Washington Commanders team that is just a couple pieces away now of actually being a pretty solid roster overall. At number 3, we have Drake May going to the New England Patriots. I'm also going to move this one to a B simply because I love Drake May, but that Patriots team is just god awful. I hope that Drake May does not start week 1 for that team next year. I honestly hope he does not start till like maybe week 15 this season, and then coming into his sophomore year he could be the full-time starter, because this is a raw prospect who needs a lot of development, and if you put him behind that offensive line with those weapons and with those running backs and with that okay defense, it's going to lead to a lot of issues for that team. Now, yes, they do have some more draft capital later in the draft to go ahead and pick up a receiver, some tackles, some playmakers to help them out, but man, that roster is completely depleted of first round grade A talent. They got to wait on Drake May, let him develop, but again, I think Drake May is a fantastic prospect, so it gets a B for me. At number 4, we had the Cardinals taking Marvin Harrison Jr. They also took at pick 27 Darius Robinson. I like Marvin Harrison Jr. and I also was a little bit higher on Darius Robinson than a lot of people. You go out there and give a playmaker on the level of a guy like a Jamar Chase and a Justin Jefferson. Like, Marvin Harrison Jr. is a fantastic prospect, and it looks like Kyler Murray is really happy about that pick, so I love that pick. I'm going to give that pick just by itself an A. Darius Robinson one to me was a little bit of a reach there. A lot of really good talented corners still on the board, like a Cooper DeJean and a Kool-Aid McKinstry, and at the time you also had some other guys like Nate Wiggins still on the board, not to mention a lot of really good offensive linemen. I still like Darius Robinson because I like his versatility of being able to play on the inside and on the outside. He's a very, very big edge rusher who, again, like I said, can also play on the inside. Good run stuffer, decent pass rusher, needs to develop a little bit. I'm going to put this at a B, but I'm going to move it to the very front like it's a B, but basically on the verge of being an A because of Marvin Harrison Jr. being your first overall pick. He was my number 1 overall player in the entire draft. At number 5, you had the LA Chargers taking Joe Alt in a bit of a, I don't want to say shocker, but a bit of a surprise. I feel like 90% of us either had them taking a receiver or taking somebody not named Joe Alt because Joe Alt does play that left tackle spot. I feel like they're probably going to end up moving him to right tackle, which hopefully he can make that translation, because if he can, that's a really solid offensive line to put around a guy like Justin Herbert. With that being said, that is a team that has absolutely zero weapons to work with. I hope they're able to figure that out in the second round of the draft. But I'm going to give this one a C simply because I love Joe Alt, but I think that there was some better options on the board. Even though I think Joe Alt is a fantastic prospect, I honestly feel like getting a guy like a J.C. Latham, who probably fits a little bit more with the identity of what Jim Harbaugh likes to do, would have been the better pick, despite Joe Alt being the better player. So Joe Alt as a singular player is a top 5 player in my big board, and 90% of people's big boards would also have Joe Alt, but I don't really love the fit of him being on that LA Chargers team. I could be wrong and definitely make a mistake there, but I'm going to have this one at a C, given the fact that I feel like they could have traded down with a team like Minnesota, let Minnesota take a JJ McCarthy at 5, and you could have had, potentially a Adonai Mitchell or Xavier Worthy to go along with having an offensive tackle like a Talisia Fuanga or a Troy Fatanu or even a JC Latham if he happened to fall. So I'm not a big fan of that pick, or I shouldn't say that. I'm a big fan of the pick, but I'm not a big fan of the way they went about this year's draft thus far. more. At number 6 was Malik Nabers going to the New York Giants. I will definitely say I am very grateful this was not a JJ McCarthy pick. I was very fearful. If you go back and watch my reaction to the draft, I was very adamant that this team does not need to take JJ McCarthy. Fortunately, they didn't. They went with Malik Nabers, who I think is a fantastic prospect. And honestly, I think he's a really solid fit with what the Giants are going to be trying to do offensively. Daniel Jones needs weapons. He probably won't be the starter to start the season. It'll probably be Drew Lock. I'm going to give this one a very solid A. I really like the idea of them going out there and finally finding some weapons to give their younger quarterbacks. If it doesn't work out with Daniel Jones or Drew Lock, next year you take the quarterback. I don't think Malik Nabers has any potential of being a bad pick. Next up, Tennessee Titans. Unfortunately, Joe Alt did not fall for them, who I know is the guy they were definitely targeting, but they went ahead and took a J.C. Latham, who I am also very high on. I had J.C. Latham, I believe, in my top 15, so taking him at number 7 was about appropriate for the value, and given the fact they desperately needed an offensive tackle, it made a ton of sense. Now, I'm a bigger fan of Talisi Fuanga than I am J.C. Latham, but I did understand the value and why they would take him at 7, especially after Joe Alt was taken off the board. With that being said, I'm going to give it a B, but I'm going to put it towards the back end of the B category where it's like it's floating around a C, simply because you weren't able to get your hands on a Joe Alt. Here we go. At number 8, Michael Penix Jr. going to the Atlanta Falcons. Let's be honest, this pick makes not a lot of sense. Now, I will say this. As a pure player, I'm a big fan of Michael Penix Jr. And again, if you guys watched my reaction of the draft, I was consistently saying that I like the player. I think he was my 4th ranked quarterback of the draft, and of course he was the 4th ranked quarterback that would fall in the draft. My issue with the pick, and I feel like 90% of people are saying the same thing, is you just signed Kirk Cousins to a 4-year, $180 million deal, and now you're bringing in an already older quarterback who's going to be 24 in a couple of weeks to sit behind your injury-prone older quarterback who you just paid a crap ton of money for. And there was a report that came out today that I guess the GM said that they were okay if Penix spent the next 4 to 5 years on the bench, which means by the time he actually starts to play, he'll be 28 or 29. For context, I think Dak Prescott, who's been in the league since 2016, I feel like he just turned 30. So Penix would be like 2 years away from being a 30-year-old quarterback when he first gets to start. I see what they're trying to do. I just feel like this was the wrong time and the wrong moment. I like Michael Penix, and if there was another team that moved up to 8 to get Penix, I'd be okay with it because I think he's a very good prospect and a very good quarterback. But you're talking about a Atlanta Falcons team that is kind of going all in with this new regime and getting a Kirk Cousins, getting a guy like a Dallas Turner or a top-tier corner or a Roma Dunze, he was still on the board, should have been the pick here for the Atlanta Falcons, and I think we all would have given it a very solid grade. Now, yes, they could find those positions later in the draft with the 2nd rounds or the 3rd rounds, depending on what picks they have, but going out there and drafting a Michael Penix just did not make sense, especially when you just brought in a Kirk Cousins. Had they drafted a quarterback in the 2026 NFL draft, that would have made a ton of sense because he would be a couple years into his contract and, you know, you would already have your success or your failures and you would figure that out from there. I'm not feeling this pick. I will say the one high upside about this pick is Kirk Cousins has had injuries the past, well, I guess last year. If he does go down, Penix could be the starter, but man, I don't know about this pick, guys. Then we have the Minnesota Vikings, and man, I feel like the Minnesota Vikings kind of stole the draft. So at 10, they took JJ McCarthy. They traded up 1 pick to jump in front of the New York Jets to actually get the pick, and then they would spend the 17th pick on Dallas Turner. They would actually trade up for that one. I didn't love trading up for Dallas Turner, to be honest with you, because I would have preferred for them to just sit very still and take a Jared Verse or take the top corner who was still available. With that being said, they made the trade and they got one of the best defensive players in the draft, and they were also to stay put and not make any major trades, such as going up to get the 5th overall pick and having to spend an extra 1st round pick and so on and so forth to get them. You were able to get the quarterback that you were likely going to get anyways, and arguably the best defensive player of the entire draft. I don't think it gets much better than that. I'm gonna have them as my number 1 biggest winner of the draft thus far through this video. I think they did a fantastic job of navigating the draft, letting players fall to them while also taking advantage of some players slipping, like a Dallas Turner. By the way, that Dallas Turner suit was god awful. NFL players, if you watch this, never wear a green suit to the NFL draft. At number 11, the New York Jets took Olu Fashanu out of Penn State. A very smart move for the New York Jets. I was interested to see what they were going to do because of the way they addressed free agency. Going out there and getting Morgan Moses, Tyron Smith, Mike Williams, and a couple really talented players. I thought it made a lot of sense for this team to go out there and take a tackle to develop behind Tyron and Morgan, especially with those two injury history, mainly Tyron Smith, who's missed a ton of games as of late. I think this is a home run hit in my opinion. Olu Fashanu, by most people's account, was a top 5 player for most of the season, and then he kind of fell back after a few inconsistencies, and I think he struggled against Ohio State, so he fell down a lot of people's boards. A little bit of a raw player, especially when it comes to run blocking, but man, I tell you what, like, this is fantastic value for a team that's a little bit on the older side, who's looking to have some cornerstones moving forward in the post-Aaron Rodgers era. Olu Fashanu could be one of those cornerstone offensive tackles who I think has a very low floor, but a very high ceiling. So I'm a big fan of this pick. I'm not going to put it as like the best pick of the draft because, you know, they were able to get some draft capital in return for trading back with the Vikings, but they were ultimately getting the guy they wanted. So I'm a big fan of this pick. I liked it a lot. Then at 12, we had the Broncos taking Bo Nix. Now, some rumors and reports came out before the draft, I think on like Tuesday or Monday, that they were potentially going to trade back with the Eagles, and the Eagles were going to take Quinion Mitchell, and the Broncos were going to get back with like pick 22 and take Bo Nix there. Well, regardless of that, it worked out for both teams because they both got the guys they want. Just so happened that they both fell to their respective pick. I'm not a fan of Bo Nix to the Broncos. I see what they're trying to do because they want to have like the Drew Brees-like quarterback who's going to follow the system and make some big plays here and there. I just don't like the value of taking Bo Nix, especially with all the problems the Denver Broncos have. They have a lot of issues on both sides of the line of scrimmage, both offensively and defensively. They don't really have a ton of weapons for Bo Nix. I think this is a situation where Jarrett Stidham probably gets to start next year, and then potentially Bo Nix comes in on the back end of the year. Hopefully they can crush the rest of the draft, even though they don't have, I think, a second round pick or something. So that's an issue. And then hopefully next year they have a fantastic draft. Very good chance the Broncos end up with like a top 5 pick next year. So hopefully they can give Bo Nix some players to work with. Again, I just don't love taking the quarterback at pick 12, especially with all the issues that roster has. So I'm going to give it a D. It's not as bad as taking Michael Penix at pick 8, but it's also just kind of a questionable pick, especially when you look at the rest of the roster and you look at a lot of the talent that's still on the board. It didn't really make a ton of sense for me. At 13, my Las Vegas Raiders took Brock Bowers. Now, initially, I was really confused and I really did not like the pick because, of course, you took Michael Mayer last year and you already have a pretty good set of weapons with guys like Devontae Adams and Jakobi Meyers. But the more I've thought about it, the more I've been like, okay, I see what they're trying to do here. I still don't think it was a very good pick. See, given the fact that this is a team that needed cornerbacks, needed offensive linemen, and there's a lot of very good players on the board here, but I understand. Brock Bowers is a top 5 to top 10 player in this year's draft, and he fell all the way to you at 13. I get it. He's not just a tight end. He's a weapon. You can put him in the slot. You can put him on the outside. I sort of wonder if the Raiders are going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets with Michael Mayer being more of like your, and I hate to make this comparison, I don't support the guy and what he did, but Brock Bowers being sort of like your Aaron Hernandez type of guy where he's going to be your receiver, your primary receiver, tight end, who's going to catch a lot of balls, catch a lot of touchdowns, with Michael Mayer being kind of like the Gronkowski guy. Again, I think in this situation, Brock Bowers' potential is a lot higher than Michael Mayer, but let's not forget, Michael Mayer was seen as a legitimately good first-round talent in last year's draft, so I don't really love the pick. Again, I would have probably taken Fuanga or Quinion Mitchell or Terran Arnold, who both fell all the way out of the top 20, which was crazy to me. I give it a C. I don't think it was the worst pick in the world, but I don't think it was a very good pick. I will say that Raiders offense is starting to look really freaking good. And when you're in a division with the Kansas City Chiefs, your offense has to be the one that gets the job done. So it'll be interesting to see what the Raiders do for the rest of their draft. Hopefully they can fix the offensive line and some of the issues in the secondary. At pick 14, the New Orleans Saints took Talicia Fuaga, and I'm a big fan of this pick, man. He was a top 10 player on my big boards. I think he was my second ranked offensive tackle. Not a lot to really hate about the guy. I think he needs to work on some pass protection issues, but overall, I mean, he is what the Saints thought Trevor Penning was going to be, like a big physical brawler who's going to punish you and bully you and be a high upside pass protector. Like, that's what Fuanga is going to be. Penning did not work out. Fuanga is going to be a very good pick. I like this pick a ton. I'm going to move it to like the middle of my B tier, where if you want to say it's an A, I'm not going to disagree with you. It's a very solid pick. I just don't think like picking an offensive tackle is never going to be flashy per se, but the Saints had a big issue they needed to look to a fix. So they went out there and they fixed it. In fact, I'm actually going to move it up to the back end of the A because I think that makes a bit more sense. All right, at 15, the Indianapolis Colts took Latu Latu. Now, I like Latu a lot. I think he might be the best pure pass rusher in this year's draft. And for him to be the first defensive player, I wasn't expecting, but I also don't really hate it. With that being said, the Colts had major issues really in their secondary. Juju Brents was a rookie last year and showed some flashes. Of course, you have Kenny Moore as your slot corner, but you needed another outside corner, and they didn't address that. Now, what I'll say about this is I think the grade of this pick greatly depends on what they do in the second round. And that can be said for every single team, obviously, but if this team in the second round is able to go out there and potentially get a Cooper DeJean or a Kool-Aid McKinstry who are somehow still available, then this pick probably moves up to like a B or an A. But because we don't have a cornerback to really fill that position, I'm going to have to put it on the front of the C here. I'll put him up right between the Chargers and the Raiders. I like the player and I like the guy and I like the story. I also like what production I think he's going to end up bringing. I think he could be, an 8 to 15 sack per season guy. And let's be honest, if the dude averages 15 sacks a season, we're going to be looking back at this pick and saying that was freaking great value for a stud. With that being said, you have guys like Quinion Mitchell and all these really good defensive backs who are still on the board, and they did not get him. So I like the pick. If they are to take one of the top corners in the second round, you can move this pick up to a B. So just keep that in mind. All right, at 16, the Seattle Seahawks took Byron Murphy II, one of my favorite defensive players in this year's draft. He just happened to be the second defensive player off the board. I'm a big fan of this pick, man. You bring in a new head coach in Mike Macdonald who wants to set the tone with his defense. Defensively speaking, the Seahawks actually have a very talented defensive line and a very talented, honestly, just defensive room in general. You bring in a Byron Murphy to be a big physical pass rusher and run stuffer up the middle alongside him and Leonard Williams. That's going to be a very good defensive line next year. This team still does have some issues, primarily more on the offensive line, and there's a lot of really good offensive linemen, such as a Troy Fautanu who is still on the board. I still really like the Byron Murphy pick though, so I'm going to move it on the back end of the B, but on the urge of being a C, depending on what they do for the rest of their draft. I think they need to look to address the tackle the guard and center position. Even though I like their center, I still think that they could use an upgrade there. Jackson Powers Johnson, still available. Zach Frazier, still available. Christian Mahogany, still available. So look out for those guys in round 2. At pick number 18, the Cincinnati Bengals took Amarius Mims. Now, I really like Mims, and I think that he's a very good, not want to say raw player because he looked so good when he was playing, but a inexperienced player. My issue with this pick is the Bengals have bigger issues this upcoming season than the offensive tackle spot. You already kind of have both your tackle spots filled with Orlando Brown and Trent Brown next year. And obviously, Trent Brown is only on a 1-year deal. And Orlando Brown, we'll see if he can continue to progress as a player there. But I just feel like this was a situation where you're investing in a player in a really big season where you have a lot of question marks, both on the defensive side of the ball as well as on the offensive side of the ball. Before the draft, Trey Hendrickson just put in a request to be traded. And if that actually happens, then they are screwed beyond belief along that defensive line. And then offensively, you have T. Higgins, who's still requesting a trade. I don't know if either one of those guys gets traded, but man, this pick, in my opinion, is going to have to be on the back end of C. I really freaking love Amarius Mims and think he's a very talented prospect and player. But when you're in a draft with a lot on the line and you take a backup offensive tackle who will be your starter next year, I just got to give it a slower or a lower grade when there's a lot on the line this upcoming season. Again, Mims is a fantastic player and prospect, but man, I would have liked to have seen this team taken maybe a defensive lineman like a Jared Verse, a Jerzon Newton who did not fall in the first round for some reason. So again, question marks here. I do think though that protecting Joe Burrow is one of their top priorities, and I do think that's a good idea. Just feel like that would have been a smarter move next year and next year's draft when there's another good tackle prospect. But regardless, I do think the player is good and I do think the pick was good, but I just would rather see somebody else have been the pick here. At number 19, Jared Verse goes to the LA Rams. It's going to be interesting to see how they use Jared Verse because at Florida State, Jared Verse was used in a multitude of ways. I think Jared Verse is at his best when he's playing that pure edge rusher position where his hand is in the dirt and he's not doing the outside linebacker stance like you see guys like Micah Parsons use a lot. If he does that for this LA Rams team, you're talking about a guy who's going to get 8 to 10 sacks a season. I think his upside is a little bit limited because I think he's kind of already an established product, but I think that established product is going to be very good. Like, I think Jared Verse could be a guy who could be in the Defensive Rookie of the Year award conversation. So with that being said, I like this pick. a lot. I'm hovering between an A and a B, but I'm going to move it on the back or on the front end of the B category. This is a Rams team that does have a couple of big holes on the roster, interior defensive lines, some issues along the offensive line, but man, or cornerback too would have been a nice pick here as well. But man, Jared Verse is such a freaking good player, man. And for you to get him at pick 19, it's hard to really complain about that. Like, your pass rushers are going to be legitimately good next year. You put him alongside Kobe Turner and the dude you took last year and all the other guys they have on that defensive line. I mean, there is a lot of talent in that defensive line room. So I do have some question marks though in that secondary. That secondary is a little weak, to be honest with you. At pick 20, the Pittsburgh Steelers took Troy Fautanu. Not expecting Troy Fautanu to fall all the way down to 20, but he did. And I think this is a freaking home run of a hit, man. You're talking about having both your tackle positions locked down for the next 10 plus years. Broderick Jones probably on that right side, Troy Fautanu on that left side. Fautanu needs to work on some things in his game. I think he would benefit from adding a little bit more size and strength to his frame, but man, you have both your tackle positions filled for the next couple of years. The only reason why it's not like higher, like on my A tier, like up here, is the fact that they did need cornerbacks. They did need some receiver prospects, and you know, drafting Fautanu isn't necessarily a flashy pick per se, but man, you have those tackle and that offensive line really figured out. The nice thing about Fautanu is if he doesn't work out at left tackle, move him inside to guard. You could probably even put him at center. Next up at pick 21, the Miami Dolphins took Chop Robinson. Now, unlike a lot of people, I'm a pretty cool guy with Chop Robinson. Like, people really don't like him because of his limited production, but the dude is a really good pass rusher. With that being said, Miami was not a good spot for him. I understand Miami wants to be a team that flies around and gets to the quarterback, but dude, this is a Dolphins team with a ton of offensive line issues, just a ton of issues in general, to be honest with you. I struggle with this pick because I like the player, but we're talking about somebody who's going to be your fourth edge rusher next year with guys like Shaquille Barrett, Bradley Chubb, and Jalen Phillips. Assuming those guys stay healthy, which is a big assumption because they've struggled with health issues. I don't know about this pick, man. I'm going to move it to the D category. Like, I'm putting it in front of Bo Nix because I think Robinson has potential to be a very good pass rusher. And similar to what I said with guys like Latu and Dallas Turner and Jared Verse, even though they're a little bit lower on my list, if they end up being, you know, 10, 15 sacks per season guys, like, what are we saying? That's a really freaking good pick. But as of right now, with a lot of the guys who are still on the board here, I just think there's better value on the board, such as a Graham Barton, a Jackson Powers Johnson, a Tyler Guyton, a Jerzon Newton. I think there's a better players on the board that they could have taken to fix this roster for next year, but I don't hate the pick. I just don't love the pick, to be honest with you. Then we had 22, we had the Eagles taking Terrion Arnold, and man, it just feels like the Eagles are one of the luckiest teams every single year in the draft. They always find ways to get incredible value with their pick. Last year it was Jalen Carter. This year it's Quinion Mitchell. Quinion Mitchell was my cornerback too, so I'm not going to have this one as an A. I'm going to move it up to the very front of the B category. This is a team that had a ton of secondary issues last year. Now your secondary looks like Darius Slay on one side, and now you have Quinion Mitchell on the other side. Two guys who are very similar players in a sense. So I think Quinion Mitchell can learn a lot from Darius Slay. Quinion Mitchell's a very safe prospect. I know he did not play at a big school, playing down there in Toledo and playing against a bunch of garbage teams, but when he was down there in the Senior Bowl, he freaking dominated SEC, Big 12, and Big 10 players. So this dude is legitimately good, and he's now going on a team that is going to need to develop him because he has to develop some kinks out of his game. But man, this is such a good pick at pick 22. He was somebody who most people thought would be going in the top 15. So for him to be there at 22 and for the Eagles to sit pat, despite rumors of them even trying to trade up to pick 12 to get him, they were able to sit back in their pick, not make any moves, and get the guy they still wanted. Can't get much better than that, man. At 23, the Jacksonville Jaguars took Brian Thomas Jr. Very interesting pick. I thought this pick was going to be Terrion Arnold because of the secondary issues, but this pick makes sense. This was honestly the right pick. This is a Jaguars team that was going to head into next year with Gabe Davis technically as their wide receiver 2 and Christian Kirk as their wide receiver 1. And of course, you have Evan Ingram and Travis Etienne. That's not very good, man. The offensive line needs some work as well, but man, you now have a freaking dynamic wide receiver to add to an offense in a massive year for the Trevor Lawrence and Doug Peterson tandem. Like, this is their big year. If they don't make it work, who knows what's going to happen with this Jaguars team. I get the defense sucks and it's not going to be very good. Mainly in the secondary, I think their pass rushers are still pretty solid, but man, this was the right pick. Give Trevor Lawrence some weapons for the next couple of years. You'll fix the defense in the second round and in the third round and then in next year's draft. So I don't blame the Jaguars in this situation. Not to mention there's still some players in the free agency that potentially the Jaguars could pick up. So this was the right pick at pick 23. I'm gonna move it as like a B plus pick here. Just the fact that they did need secondary, and Terran Arnold, who is a higher ranked player on my big board than Brian Thomas, was still on the board. So I'll have it as like a B plus to like a good solid B. 24, the hometown Detroit Lions, home of the 2024 NFL Draft, take Terran Arnold, and it was a really dope moment when it actually happened. Like seeing the crowd react the way they did, and then the subsequent pick afterwards was the Green Bay Packers was such a funny moment. Lions actually traded up for that pick, and second that pick was made, everyone just started leaving. Shout out to Detroit. That was a freaking awesome moment and a cool display of the Detroit pride, but it's an A-plus pick. Terran Arnold, again, was my number 1 ranked corner, somebody who was in the realm of being in my top 10. Now you add him into a secondary which needed a, let's be honest, a dog like a Terran Arnold, especially after some of the news of Cameron Sutton. Your secondary now, it looks a lot more improved. Is there still some kinks? Yes, but you put him alongside Brian Branch and Carlton Davis. Not a bad secondary at all. They were able to only give up a 3rd round pick to move up to get him with Dallas, so that pick makes a ton of sense for Dallas. We'll talk about them in a second. It was a good trade for them as well. 25, Packers kind of shocked a little bit of people by taking Jordan Morgan. I like Jordan Morgan, but man, Graham Barton was right there, and Graham Barton is, in my opinion, a better player than Jordan Morgan. Now, granted, their big board might have said Jordan Morgan was better, but just think Graham Barton's the better player, man. So I'm gonna move him as like a C, because I do like Jordan Morgan and I do think he's a good player, but just when Graham Barton's available, you take Graham Barton because that's a dude who can play, tackle, guard, center. Jordan Morgan's probably going to end up playing guard on this team. I imagine probably play right guard, but I can even see him even moving to left tackle if they need him to, or depending on what they do with Zach Tom. I get taking an offensive tackle or an offensive lineman in general, but Graham Barton's on the board. Jackson Powers-Johnson is still on the board. Tyler Guyton's still on the board. Just feel like this was a bit of a reach for a guy who you probably could have taken in the beginning of the second round. 26, Graham Barton. You're not going to hear a lot of complaints out of me in this one. This is a Tampa Bay Buccaneers pick, and for Graham Barton to fall to pick 26 when there was a lot of speculation that he would end up falling or not falling or rising up draft boards to be a top 15 pick, for him to go to pick 26, it's good value for the Buccaneers. I'm not going to give it like an A+ because it's not a super flashy pick, but this pick gets the job done. I wonder what position they're going to fill him in at. Are they going to put him at center? They're going to put him at guard? They're going to keep him at tackle? I would probably move him into that left guard spot if that was them, depending on what they already have. Next up at pick 28, the Kansas City Chiefs traded up with the Buffalo Bills. And this is where we're actually going to do both Buffalo and Kansas City. We'll start with Buffalo. Buffalo got a lot of, I'll just say it, a lot of shit for making these trades. But in my opinion, it made a lot of sense to trade down in this spot. They know who they're getting, and I think that guy's going to be Adonai Mitchell. I would be willing to put money that he's going to be the first pick in next year, or in the second round. So for them to trade back and get even more draft capital from the Chiefs and from the Panthers to move back and still end up with the guy you wanted, it made sense. With that being said, you traded with the team that has taken you out of the playoffs like what, 3 of the past 4 years? Kind of a bad look, especially when you give the Chiefs Xavier Worthy, who's a fantastic player and is going to fit so perfectly with that Chiefs team. For me, the Bills end up with a, I'll go B- because I like the fact they traded back. It would have been an A+ for me because they got the guy they wanted plus draft capital, but they traded with the freaking Chiefs. And this situation, Chiefs are big winners. You get Xavier Worthy, who for me was a second round pick, but I was willing for him to be a first round pick if it was for the Chiefs, and that just happened to be the case. He's not Tyreek Hill per se, but he has that Tyreek Hill level speed, obviously 4.21. And you put him next to Patrick Mahomes, like all of a sudden, like this Chiefs offense can go back to being somewhat of that air raid offense. But the thing with him is he's not just a speedster. He's not just a Jalen Hyatt or a John Ross. This is somebody who you can throw a bubble screen for and he can take it to the house. This is somebody who's a genuinely good route runner when he chooses to be, who can run some underneath routes like some drags, some zigs, some slants, and he's going to succeed and find separation. So you're getting somebody who isn't a one-hit wonder or isn't a one-trick pony. He's going to do a lot of really good things for this Chiefs team, especially when you have a genius like Andy Reid who's dissected his film and knows his strengths and knows his cons. This is a perfect spot for him to go to. Can't get much better than that. Then at pick 29, the Dallas Cowboys took Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma. At the time, I hated the pick. I was going to say this was not a good pick for Dallas. I watched some film over a bunch of these players last night, mainly Tyler Guyton, because I was a little bit unfamiliar with his game, and me being from Dallas and me being a little bit of a Cowboys fan, I definitely did grow on me. With that being said, Jackson Powers-Johnson to me was the right pick here, but it was not the pick. I'm going to give it a C+. Dallas had to fill that left tackle position. That's what Guyton's going to hopefully do. My issue with Guyton is he's a right tackle. Played at Oklahoma as a very raw, unproven right tackle. Now, last year there was a lot of really good flashes, but he still has a lot of kinks to work out with his game. Struggles with his pad level, struggles with very speedy guys, needs to probably put a little bit more strength on. I will say this, Dallas typically does a very good job of drafting offensive tackles. They know how to develop guys. They developed Tyron Smith. They developed Zach Martin. They developed Travis Frederick back then. They developed Tyler Smith, who's now an all-pro left guard. What I like about this pick is you keep Tyler Smith at that left guard position, and Tyler Smith could be like the path for how you develop a guy like a Tyler Guyton. This pick makes sense to me. I just would have preferred Jackson Powers-Johnson. Maybe that's just my preference and talent, but I don't hate the pick here for Dallas. 30, the Ravens end up with Nate Wiggins. This is an A overall pick. I'm gonna move them like somewhere here. Most of these picks are A's. I have like A minuses back here, but it's an A overall grade for me. I love Nate Wiggins. He was somebody who was in my top 25. I think he's a very talented corner. Small frame, can't tackle to save his life, but the good news about that is the dude can cover like crazy, and as long as the ball isn't thrown at him, you don't really have to worry about that. The dude can make plays. He's a hustler. Again, he doesn't make a lot of flashy like tackles, but you're not expecting a guy like Nate Wiggins to do that. He's somebody who you want to cover somebody in both zone and man and to, do the job. He gets the job done. With the Ravens secondary not being fantastic, Nate Wiggins can go in there and fix a big issue for that team. 31, Ricky Pearsall. Similar situation with Michael Penix. I love the player, but now that pick 31, I thought he was going to be going in the early to late second round, but now he's going as early as pick 31. The player's good. The positional fit is good. He's going to fill in ideally in that Deebo Samuel kind of similar role, but Deebo Samuel is a really good player, and for them to be trading Deebo Samuel or Ayuk, I just don't know about that one, man. I think there were some better players on the board, such as an A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Legette or a Ladd McConkey. I'm going to move this one as a D. I like the player a ton, but man, you're taking a downgrade at receiver if you do decide to trade Deebo Samuel. And even if you don't and you're able to keep both those guys, he's going to be your wide receiver 3. And that is a 49ers team that has a lot of issues in that offensive line and even some defensive back issues. So I don't know, not a very good pick, not good value. Again, I like Ricky Pearsall and I feel bad for saying it. If he was taken anywhere in the second round, at any spot, I would have been like, oh, great pick, good pick. But man, back end of the first round with all the talent still on the board, not a fan of that one. Then the last pick of the draft goes to Xavier Legette. I like Legette a lot. I think he was worthy of the 32nd overall pick. I would have preferred for him to go in the second, but I understand. You move up one spot, you give up, I think, like a 5th round pick. So did you have to do it? Probably not, but you wanted to make a splash pick in the first round. I get it. I understand why you would do it. Dave Canales' first draft. He wants to make an impact on this team. Trades up into the first round, gets an Xavier Legette. The upside of this pick is ridiculous because Legette is, for the most part, kind of only a 1-year wonder. Like, he's only had one productive year, but he was very productive last year for South Carolina. Upside of this pick, you're getting DK, you're getting AJ Brown. Downside of this pick, I don't think there's a lot of downside here. The only thing I really worry about is his separation abilities, but similar to DK and AJ, man, just throw the ball up and let the dude make a play. I didn't love giving up a 5th round pick when you probably just could have taken him at pick 32 or 33, but regardless, Xavier Legette moving into the first round and being the #1 overall pick for the Carolina Panthers made a ton of sense, so I like that pick a lot. But that is going to conclude this video. If you guys did enjoy, hit the like and subscribe button. Tonight is round 2 and round 3, so I'll have another video tomorrow of ranking the 5 biggest winners and losers of round 2 and round 3. Again, if you enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.